This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Ian Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 7 minutes past on LBC. Welcome to the programme. It's Ian Dale here with you until 10. The loan charge is something that has slowly crept up the political agenda over the past few years. I first heard of it back in, I think, 2018, when I was contacted by someone from the Loan Charge Action Group, and I didn't know what it was. And we'll explain what it is in just a couple of minutes. And I remember having a Treasury Minister, Mel Stride, on Cross Question that evening. And I read out this email to him. He was none too pleased, I think, because he thought I was basically doing something a little bit unethical, bouncing him on it. And I then got quite involved in the subject, and we've held a couple of phone-ins on it, or certainly we did at that time, and I've followed it ever since. But really, the campaign to get rid of the loan charge hasn't achieved what it wanted to, what it needed to. And essentially, I believe this is akin to the post office scandal, which we've talked so much about over the past few weeks, where there are tens of thousands of people, maybe more than that, who have been criminally treated by His Majesty's now, Revenue and Customs. There have been suicides as a result of it. There have been bankruptcies as a result of it. And it is, to my mind, a totally unethical piece of legislation, which has been, or if the legislation isn't unethical, it has been totally abused by HMRC. And as I say, there are thousands of innocent people who were advised to take part in a particular tax scheme, and HMRC decided to demand back taxes from them, going back, in some cases, 20 years. Now, I've always understood that HMRC can do that, but it has to be a maximum of 6 years. Yet they've gone back 20 years. But imagine if someone came to you and said, actually, by the way, we'd like tens or hundreds of thousands of pounds off you for tax that we think you should have paid, but you haven't. So I want to hear from you in this hour if you've been a victim of the loan charge, and whether you think, like I do, that this is effectively akin to what's happened in the post office. And there was a debate in the House of Commons this afternoon, which is kind of why we're doing it this evening, where lots of MPs from right across the House of Commons, I think every single political party, spoke out against it. And still, the minister responsible, who's relatively new in the job, they've had about 6 or 7 ministers responsible for this since 2018, and each of them goes native. They seem to accept what the civil servants tell them, what HMRC tell them, without question. And some of the remarks made by Nigel Huddleston, the Minister in the House of Commons this afternoon, I mean, almost beggar belief. Well, in case you're wondering, what is this loan charge? It's better if an expert tells you rather than me. And we have Keith Gordon with us, a tax barrister at Temple Tax Chambers. Keith, very good evening.
Evening, Ian. You asked what the loan charge is.
Yes.
Well, it's worse than you described it.
Okay.
Because you first said that the loan charge was an unethical piece of legislation. Then you sort of backtracked and said, well, maybe it's ethical, but it's being abused. It is fundamentally unethical legislation. And you also talked about the fact that the revenue can normally go back 4 years, 6 years, etc. The whole problem with the loan charge is they were going back for tax that the workers who are being demanded, subject to the loan charge, didn't even owe. I'll explain. Contractors were working for organisations which were paying them, deducting money which the contractors thought was tax, because normally if you're a worker you have to suffer tax at source under PAYE, but was actually being pocketed by these umbrella companies as pure profit. The revenue should have been going after those umbrella companies. Not all umbrella companies are dodgy, but there were some umbrella ones, some which were. They should have been going after those companies and saying, you should be deducting PAYE, you weren't deducting PAYE, we want that money. The revenue missed the boat. And they suddenly realised, we've gone for the wrong people. So they introduced the loan charge to create a tax liability that mirrored the umbrella company's liability and insisted on demanding it from the workers themselves.
And the workers could never have envisaged that this could happen.
Absolutely. And they couldn't afford it because they'd earned their money, they'd had the deductions, and over many years, most people spend what they earn. Very few people are able to afford to save and build up large sums of capital to face unexpected tax bills.
So the legislation in 2016, if HMRC had said, well, we need to change the law because there is a loophole, so in future, this is what's going to happen, that would have been fine. But instead, they went back to people going back to the 1990s.
They didn't need a change of law. The law has always been that tax was deductible at source when the payments were first made by the umbrella companies. The umbrella companies should have paid the tax over to HMRC. No law needed to be changed. The loan charge was introduced just solely so that HMRC could put effectively a figurative gun to the head of the workers to say, we want the tax that we should have collected from someone else.
So the government still say, or the HMRC, presumably having put words into Nigel Huddleston, the Treasury Minister's mouth today, they still justify it on the basis that this tax was owed and therefore, on behalf of the taxpayer, we're going to collect it, come what may.
This tax was owed, but not by the workers. And even when tax is genuinely owed by to HMRC, if HMRC are too late to collect it, then the rules, not just in tax law, but generally they're limitation laws. Fundamental concept of justice in this country is that after a certain period of time, debt's effectively written off. So, but yes, the tax was owed, but by the umbrella companies, and the revenue sort of stop there and just leave it as tax was owed. They don't actually say who owed it.
Do you agree with me that this has the potential to be as big as the post office scandal?
It has the potential. It is just as abhorrent.
And it's essentially a case of a government organisation, which is what HMRC is. In fact, it's more of a government organisation than the post office, isn't it?
Yes.
It is a government organisation using its huge powers against ordinary people.
Precisely. And a series of ministers being gullible or refusing to listen to the suffering of the ordinary people because they're more interested in their own political careers going forward.
Well, as I say, there are an increasing number of politicians who see that this is something that needs to be addressed. I was very interested to see Darren Jones, who's a good friend of this programme. He's the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury. He's very familiar with this, having been the chair of the Business Select Committee before. I mean, he called on the government to see sense today, and you would hope that if he's a Treasury Minister in a new Labour government, that he might actually do something on this. And I think there are many of us who will try and hold him to account if he doesn't. Keith, thank you very much indeed. That's Keith Gordon from Temple Tax Chambers. I just want to read you out, if I can find it, a quote from David Davis, who was speaking in the debate this afternoon. He said HMRC had previously referred itself to a watchdog over suicides over the loan charge. And he said that is as close as you could get when dealing with government departments to a confession. They know they've done wrong, and they've known it for some time, and they've known the consequences of the death of people and enormous harm to people, and yet they've continued to do the same thing over and over again. He's not talking about Paula Venables from the Post Office. He's talking about HMRC. With me in the studio, I have Greg Mulholland, who's Secretary of the Loan Charge Action Group, also former Liberal Democrat MP, and Blanche Zaff, who's a volunteer for the Loan Charge Action Group's helpline, whose husband Steve was one of its victims. Greg, let me start with you. We've talked about this many times over the past 5 or 6 years. Do you think progress is being made, that people are beginning to see the light of the very nature of this scandal?
I do, Ian. And first of all, if I can just say on behalf of the thousands of people involved in the Loan Charge Action Group, and the Loan Charge Action Group is a group of people, all of whom are victims of this pernicious legislation and of mis-selling by the promoters behind the schemes. And you were a pioneer of this issue. Today, suddenly, this is on all sorts of other media. It's on the BBC, it's on Sky, it's everywhere. But you were a pioneer, and thank you for that. Thank you for picking up on that, because that matters. And we've seen with the post office scandal that really does matter. Nick Wallace picked that up. No one listened to him, and look what's happened now. So thank you for that. I do genuinely think that today was a day when the scales fell away from lots of people's eyes, and they suddenly saw through the utterly dishonest propaganda that's been peddled for years by HMRC and then parroted by the Treasury, and as you said yourself, and several MPs said it today, simply reading lines that are untrue, that are dishonest, that are misleading. And I think today was the day when things have changed. Nigel Huddleston looked very nervous. I don't know if you were able to watch the debate.
I haven't watched it, no, but I've read some of his words.
He looked very nervous. He looked very uncomfortable. And for the first time, I think, although he did say things, he said HMRC say, and they're all very sympathetic and, all the usual nonsense, he looked nervous. He looked troubled. And I think today, with the incredible speeches, there were some absolutely extraordinary speeches today, and from people from all sides, if you said, from the political spectrum. You've got Jacob Rees-Mogg and you've got John McDonnell absolutely excoriating HMRC and the government over this. So that tells you something. The whole House, all these different parties, Labour, Conservative, SNP, Liberal Democrat, DUP, all coming together. So, yeah, I do feel that today was something of a breakthrough. But, of course, now we have to keep fighting, we have to keep pushing until we actually get some change.
And I think part of the problem is that sub-postmasters, we all know what they are, we all know who they are, we all know them in our local community. When you use the word contractor, it doesn't quite have the same ring, does it? People think, contractor, that means they're invoicing. That's not how normal people do things. But they lose sight of the fact that people who are contractors are often nurses. Just ordinary individuals doing very normal jobs, but they've fallen victim to this kind of injustice. Well, Blanche, let's turn to you, if I may, because your husband was one of the victims. I mean, it's obviously affected your family. You hear stories every day on the Loan Charge Action Group helpline of people who have... you tell me what you're hearing every day.
We heard about the loan charge in 2018. I didn't understand it at all, but I knew that my partner was involved and I wanted to help. So I joined the Loan Charge Action Group, volunteered for the help desk, and I thought people would want to know what the loan charge is because I didn't understand it. Nobody knew. The first call I took was male sobbing. So I just chatted and said, I'm fine till you can speak. And the number of calls we got increased by the week, and eventually Steve, my partner, would help me. And everybody was different because, as you said, they could be a nurse, they could be a budget airline pilot, IT, all walks of life. And what they all had in common was, I want to be on the right side of IR35, which is for contractors. They were recommended to go to umbrella companies. Some didn't get employment unless they did, and that was NHS. So they employed a lot, from nurses to porters to kitchen staff, you name it. So they wanted to be on the right side of IR35. They wanted to know that the schemes were compliant with HMRC, which they were told they were, that they were legal, that they were QC approved. Everybody asked those questions. And then all of a sudden, for many, they had closed years. It worked on an honest system. There were nudge letters through the post. So everybody worries about getting a brown envelope, particularly on their birthday or Friday when you can't do anything, or Christmas. And they were getting letters that said, we believe you might be involved in. The first thing an honest person does is panic, pick up the phone, make a phone call. I'm really worried. Am I clear? And the first thing that happened was all of their closed years were opened. We increased on our help calls. They got more dramatic because the way HMRC communicated with them, they felt guilty. They felt they'd done something wrong. They felt they might go to prison. In fact, the first suicide victim could afford the money, but he thought he was going to go to prison and bring shame on the family.
Total echoes of the post office here, aren't there?
Yes. And similar to the post office, other people who did not understand it would say, well, pay your tax. HMRC say you're a tax dodger, so you must be. And a lot of these people hadn't told their partners because they were ashamed. They hadn't told their children at uni in case the children said, Dad, you can't afford it, so we're not going to go. And the helpline that Loan Charge Action Group set up was because HMRC didn't have one. They did have one, but their helpline was to pay monies that were never legally due. So we had a mental health line. None of us properly trained. And as I say, we heard people sobbing. There was an occasion, had a very calm woman on the phone. She was actually on a bridge in London, and I had no idea how to deal with it. But I obviously did the right thing, because at Christmas I got a little text saying, thank you, I'm still here. The worst thing was in 2020, Steve and I were taking as many calls as we could, and we phoned the people back as quickly as we could to deal with them. And we went travelling, and my Steve suffered a breakdown because all he heard was helplessness and no way out at all.
And I know for a lot of helplines, I mean, the kit, particularly when you're dealing with people who are suicidal, is just to listen, because people want to tell their story to somebody who's going to be sympathetic. But I mean, the psychological impact on you both from doing that day after day must be massive.
I dealt with it a lot better. Steve didn't deal with it at all. We were both in the public gallery this morning at 10 because we didn't want to be late. We couldn't believe the turnout of MPs, as Greg said. And most of them were retailing stories of their constituents who've been involved in the loan charge. And I looked at Steve because I didn't know whether he was going to cope with it or not. But some of the stories, I suddenly remembered some of the stories, some of the calls I took, some of the people I spoke to. It was very difficult.
Mm.
And Ian, may I just remind listeners, LBC listeners, that the reason that the Loan Charge Action Group set up a helpline entirely staffed by volunteers, entirely funded by the membership contributions from the loan charge victims, is because in 2018, several MPs, I think the first one was Stephen Lloyd, who was then the MP for Eastbourne, in the House of Commons asked, and it was Mel Stride who answered, said, will you set up a helpline? And the answer that was received then in the House of Commons and since in letters was, there is a helpline to help people settle their tax. And today in the debate, Nigel Huddleston again repeated the HMRC line that he was fed, that, if people are worried, the first thing they should do is to contact HMRC. But as you've heard, when they do, they say, by the way, we think you might owe even more. So it's really sinister. So I just want to pay tribute to Blanche and all those volunteers, because I know we have statistics that were shared with MPs on the Loan Charge Action Group. The LCAG, the Loan Charge Action Group volunteer helpline, has saved numerous lives. People who were on the verge of killing themselves because of the government and HMRC's loan charge. And people like Blanche have saved lives.
I've got to go to a break, but are you happy to stay on for a few minutes? Because there's a few more questions I want to put to you before we go to calls. And if you would like to maybe relate your experience of the loan charge, give me a call, 0345 6060 973. And if this is the first time you even heard the phrase, I mean, there are so many echoes of the post office scandal here, aren't there? What do you think should happen now?
OK then, class.
Class pass, Jane. See you all tomorrow.
All right.
Look, I got 12
messages. Look what's trending.
Go on, send it.
Post it.
What? Why, bro?
Why are they writing that? What are they saying?
Growing up with phones isn't easy. EE Learn has free tools to help for every kid on any network. Search EE Learn.
Ian Dale on LBC.
With SimpsonTravel.com for luxury villas and boutique hotels.
7:25. We have with us Greg Mulholland, who's Secretary of the Loan Charge Action Group, and Blanche South, who's a volunteer for it and runs that helpline. And her partner Steve was one of its victims. Friend has just texted me to say, please mention IR35, Ian. That's at the root of this. And I'm an ordinary person too. This is actually quite a well-known person, but I won't name who it is. And I mean, again, IR35, it's just as if somebody in HMRC has thought to themselves, how can we do something that annoys people, that is clearly wrong, but they can't fight us because we are the great HMRC. That seems to be the prevalent attitude here. They still can't accept that they're in the wrong. And I just wonder whether, I mean, this Minister Nigel Huddleston, as I say, is fairly new in the job. Have you asked to meet him to talk about this?
The Loan Charge and Taxpayer Fairness APPG has privately asked to meet, and Nigel, I believe, has said that he will do that. So, the MPs, and it's Sammy Wilson is co-chair with Greg Smith and Baroness Kramer. So that meeting will now be organised. But the experience that the APPG has had recently is that ministers will say, yes, we will meet with HMRC officials, but we're not prepared to talk about any change. So, you can agree to meet with someone on a completely pointless basis just to show that you are apparently engaging. But if you're not prepared to engage and talk about change, it's pointless.
They need to take him aside in the voting lobbies, don't they, and have a private meeting with him and say, look, you've got this really wrong. You could be the next Ed Davey and you could cop the blame for this. And I actually think Ed Davies probably been blamed a little bit too much for what's happened on the post office. However, there is ministerial responsibility, and if the minister's not asking the right questions and doesn't quite understand the technical side of it, and this is not an easy thing to understand, it's not surprising, therefore, if they just parrot the line that they're given.
No, you're right. And as I say, I would ask, I know that you're busy, people are busy, but there were some extraordinary speeches today. But Nigel Huddleston looked really uncomfortable. He looked nervous to be reading out some of the lines he was reading. And I think
he was back as sports minister, probably.
Yeah, I think probably in his heart he thought some of this isn't right. And you're right, the post office scandal is a lesson for everyone that our system of accountability in the UK is flawed. Because yes, it's right that ministers are accountable. Absolutely, they're the front people. They're the people who are elected. But if they don't challenge the advice they're given, if they don't challenge their own advisors and civil servants, but if they don't actually challenge a body like HMRC, and some of the comments today about the lack of accountability, about the abuse of state power, cruelty, extraordinary. Honestly, if you look at the comments today, quite extraordinary, and that's the reality. And it's not just the case with the loan charge, it's also the case, as you said, with IR35, with the way HMRC are treating victims of pension fraud, still going after them for tax, the way they're treating the victims of investment fraud. Because HMRC have more powers than the police and virtually no accountability. And when you have, sorry to say this, frankly, useless, chinless ministers who stand at the dispatch box on a decent salary, parroting what's been put in front of them and written not even by their own advisors, by the propaganda department and the press office of HMRC, there is no hope. And that has to change. And let's hope, let's say it now, let's hope Nigel Huddleston decides not to be the latest one, because Mel Stride started it, then Jessie Norman, then Lucy Fraser, then Victoria Atkins. They all let themselves down and they all undermined, frankly, our constitution. Let's give Nigel a chance and see if he has the courage to actually challenge HMRC and listen to evidence and the truth.
Well, I can't promise to make a 4-part drama about the loan charge, but I have another idea, which I'll tell you about in just a second, see where we get to. Now, the Loan Charge Action Group's website is hmrcloancharge.info. You can email them via that website. Meanwhile, Blanche has mentioned how the loan charge has driven some of its victims towards taking their own lives. I should just say that if you need someone to talk to, not about the loan charge specifically, but more generally, you can always call the Samaritans on 116 123, and it's totally free 24/7. Blanche, thank you for joining us. Greg, thank you for coming in again, and we will certainly keep our eye on what's going on and keep putting the pressure on. If I ever interview Nigel Huddleston, I can assure you I will do my duty.
Washing, dishes, vacuuming, household chores never end, even for me, Albert Einstein. But you know what? I'll leave it all till later, because I've got a smart meter. And right now I'm part of a scheme where I get rewarded for changing when I use my energy. More than 1 million others took part last winter using less energy at peak times. Good, eh?
Get ready to start earning rewards. Search Get a Smart Meter today. Eligibility and availability vary. Consumer action required. Reward schemes available to selected customers.
At B&Q and TradePoint, get 3 for 2 on Dulux and Valspar paint, including paint mixing and trade paints. So whatever the surface or space, if you've got the plans, we've got the paint for less. Shop in-store or online. You can do it. Exclusions apply. Value of every third item per single transaction in descending price order deducted. Ends 22nd of January. See DIY.com.
Ian Dale on LBC.
With SimpsonTravel.com. Plan your 2024 holiday now.
7:34. Justin Urquhart-Stewart joins us for our business update. He's co-founder of the Regionally Investment Platform. Justin, we are very short of time today, so we're going to have to keep this a little briefer than normal. 3,000 jobs at risk at Tata Steel.
Absolutely. It's a story, I suppose, been going on for years when we had British Steel, as it was, nationalised and then actually effectively tried to sell it off. It's been a very disaster case all the way through. It needs a huge amount of investment. But the thing about Port Talbot is it's where we've got the last blast furnaces, which create steel. The question is now, everybody produces steel all over the world, but ours is more expensive for various reasons. But the deal is, could you actually turn it into electric arc steel plant, which is actually cheaper to run and only uses old metals as opposed to actually creating new steel. So that could be a much more effective way coming through. But of course, inevitably, there will be jobs going, and will the government be supporting it? I think the government's probably fed up in dealing with the steel industry over the past few years. We can't afford to compete necessarily against other areas around the world, but we can do more specialist steel. Remember, in value, actually Sheffield produces more steel than it did 40 years ago, but not with big furnaces, the specialised stuff.
Now, mortgage and credit card defaults have increased. I suppose that's not a massive surprise, but they're also expected to go up again this year.
Sadly, yes. I mean, as you talked about before, with rates going up the entire time, companies have been very happy to put those rates up because, frankly, a lot of banks and investment houses were losing money on it. But it's inevitable that you've seen the tightness of credit. There's going to be an awful lot of losses. And sadly, unfortunately, if we don't educate ourselves properly on finance, many people don't really understand, A, how much it's been costing them and how they should try and manage it. The answer must be go and speak to the lender now, bank, building society, or join something like credit union. They can actually provide cheaper facilities and give you that sort of flexibility without the patronising charges going with it.
Justin, thank you. That's Justin Urquhart-Stewart, co-founder of the Regionally Investment Platform. Right, let's go to your calls on the loan charge. Doug is in Beaconsfield. Hi, Doug.
Hi there. Hi, Ian.
Hi, what would you like to say?
I've just, I guess I've been in a bit of a nightmare spiral since 2012. That was when I was using one of these schemes that I was permanent, and then I got a contract out in South Africa, so I wasn't even working in the UK, and it was for an American consultancy. So I'm sure if, I thought long and hard about it and I had a decent accountant, I would have maybe, had an offshore arrangement. But anyway, I went with this approach. I was told by the company that, it was all QC approved. They had their in-house tax barristers, et cetera, they even produced an email which basically said that they had insurance in case anything went wrong. So, and they said it was IR35 proof. So, I wouldn't be investigated. And that was the main thing, really. And then all of a sudden, towards the end of the contract, I started to get letters from HMRC demanding substantial amounts of money. And it's been going on for, ever since 2013. So, and it's, they tend to just send out letters continually barracking you to demand that you settle and pay up. And normally having spoken to various people in similar situations, it seems that they enjoy doing, sending out letters on a Friday or just before your birthday or just before Christmas.
Do you think that actually is deliberate?
Oh, 100%. When I've been liaising with the Loan Charge Action Group, they've been telling me that they actually HMRC send their staff on courses to psychological training courses, which basically what it's down to is actually getting their staff to put pressure on individuals who are the low-hanging fruit, I think, who
so basically,
are willing to settle.
What they're indulging in is a basic form of psychological torture.
Yeah.
And I can hear it in your voice that you've had this hanging over you for 11 years, 12 years now. Yeah. And it still isn't resolved, presumably. And you fear for what might happen.
Well, exactly. Unfortunately, it has affected me, substantially. It's not just my mental well-being, but my physical well-being. I've been into hospital several times with heart scares. It's just non-stop, and unfortunately, in the end, my marriage broke down as well. So, and I'm losing my home. So, I was almost one of those people to take my own life. I came very close, but luckily, I met someone and they pulled me out of my headspace. Got me to do counselling. That was the other thing. HMRC, they got into trouble apparently in one of the Treasury meetings when they were cross-examined, and they said that they did support people with mental health issues, and it was rubbish. They weren't. They literally were just seeing us as people that they had to demand money out of.
And you see, the irony is that HMRC have used these schemes themselves as employers, haven't they?
Well, exactly. So, apparently HMRC have actually employed contract staff under their own noses that were using these schemes. Apparently these schemes have been running for sort of 10, 20 years before they actually did anything. So, people were lulled into full sense of security and thought, well, these schemes work. They obviously work. They've been ratified by barristers and so on and so forth, and councils. So it must be fine.
Well, one thing that I can do is I do a monthly phone-in with Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor. We've got one with her next week, I think. And I think it's on Tuesday. It's the week after. I'm going to play her part of your call, Doug, and try and get her to include a commitment in the Labour manifesto, not necessarily to abolish it, because, she's not going to do that live on the radio, but what she could do was certainly make a firm commitment to look into it properly and hopefully take some action. That's all I can do to help at this stage. But
thank you.
Anyway, she's the one that could be Chancellor after the next election, so the more she hears about it, the better. Doug, thanks for having the courage to phone in. I'm sure that wasn't an easy call to make. Let's go to Matthew in Leeds. Hello, Matthew.
Thanks for having me on. I just wanted to ring up about my experience. Obviously really nervous, and to be honest, I'm not entirely sure what to say, so it might just be...
You put it in your own words, Matthew. You're the one that's gone through it, so you know it better than anybody else.
Yeah, so I was referred to a management company by a friend in 2016 when I started a new contracting role. Obviously, was advised that it was all legitimate and it HMRC approved. So, similar story to everybody else. It was a similar arrangement with a limited company for a financial services company very well known, which was the same model for 3,000-4,000 contractors, whatever, that were working at the time.
What line of work are you in?
So I work in IT. I'm an IT contractor. And it was probably around about 2019 when I first sort of became aware that there was something coming up the road really for me. there was a blanket ban introduced on contractors using a limited company by the company I was working for, which is effectively the only thing what got me away from the scheme. The reason being that I didn't know how to get away from that scheme. The whole reason I did it in the first place was that I was advised that, you pay the money, we deduct the taxes, and then you get whatever's left. And that security was the appeal for me. It wasn't the fact that I might be saving a bit of tax. That wasn't relevant. It was the point that whatever money I had left was mine, so I didn't have to worry about owing HMRC money, by not holding back enough tax. So it's ironic. I'm possibly in the worst position I can possibly be because of that approach. So as it stands, I've, the same sort of experience as Doug. I cannot tell you the anxiety and the experience of receiving a brown envelope in the post.
Yeah.
It feels like, heart drops into your stomach whenever you see that envelope. You don't know what's in there. And to be perfectly honest, I don't understand the content of half of the letters that I receive.
And are you getting professional advice?
I was advised by the management company to reach out to a tax specialist company, which I did a couple of years ago. That was, £1,000, which ended up them sending an appeal letter on my behalf. That was about it. At the moment, I don't have really any tax advice. I'm a sort of single parent of 4 children. I've got my own house, so I'm not in a position really where I've got masses of disposable income to be able to afford to pay for tax advice.
Now, you live in Leeds. I don't suppose you live in the constituency of Rachel Reeves, do you?
No, I'm actually in the constituency of John Trickett. I have been in touch with him, and he is supportive, of the loan charge victims. But as it stands, I received a letter in 2022, a demand for £210,000.
What?
Which was a Regulation 80, which I assume means that they think I was working inside IR35. I didn't even earn that amount of money during that period. So I have been told that what HMRC do is take an estimate on the high side to scare people into calling and trying to settle. I think that's what's happened in this regard. Since that is subject to a standstill agreement, so it's in the back of my mind, it's ongoing, I don't know what's happening with it. Since then, I've received a letter just in December over Christmas asking me to declare my any loans during the period up to 2019. So I don't know if that's in addition to the 210,000 or a separate issue. It's not clear. And to be perfectly frank, I've got about maybe £60,000 in equity in my house, and that's all I've got to give. So depending if I can't get any reasonable settlement, I'm bankrupt. And if that's the case, I will struggle to get work because obviously the financial services sector is the predominant sector for IT contractors. So,
it's just wicked, isn't it? That they can. I used the phrase psychological torture earlier, and clearly that's what they're doing with you. And this is a pattern, isn't it? And I'm sure you've talked to other victims, and they've had exactly the same experience as you.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. I don't want to be, exonerated of any tax owed. I'm prepared to pay what's owed, but it has to be reasonable and realistic. And, I listened to the parliamentary debate today, and that was the overwhelming point, is that people cannot afford what they're asking for. And unfortunately, for some people, the only way out was to take their own lives. And that's a scandal in this country.
Well, it is a total scandal. And those who are responsible for this policy of psychological torture at some point will be held to account for it, I can assure you, because I have yet to meet a politician who doesn't agree with the Loan Charge Action Group, apart from the ministers responsible for the loan charge. because they seem to just be, I mean, in a sense with the post office, if you have a meeting with like the post office and you're the minister for the post office and you ask them in fairly direct terms what's going on and they totally reassure you that there's nothing to worry about, you've got to have some evidence to go back to them and say, well, actually, I think there is. Now, so I have a little modicum of sympathy with the ministers in that position. But here, we know what the effects are. We've got all the evidence we need, and yet still they seem to believe HMRC over you, Matthew. And look, I really hope it works out. I can assure you we're going to keep our eyes on this as much as we can. Thank you very much for your call.